Last-minute shakeup at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. It's okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as
Thanks,
simple
Ryan.
as 1,
What's
2,
up?
3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller, and today we are going to talk about why your safety zone is actually your danger zone. So, why courage is key if you want to make powerful movement forward. I have an author, a best-selling author, Dr. Margie Warrell, with me today. She is the author of The Courage Gap, but she's also a best-selling author of other books. She is a friend of a friend, and she was on my show a few years ago. And I personally think Margie is phenomenal. I think she has an amazing voice, so much experience, and she does a beautiful way of putting all that together for us so that we can take that leap of faith and trust ourselves to move forward. So, Margie, I'm going to bring you in and have you introduce yourself. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Angie. And thank you for having me on. It's good to see you again.
Yes, it's good to see you too. So, this isn't your first book. This isn't your first rodeo, is it?
No, it's not. It's actually my sixth book. But there's a thread that weaves through all of my work, Angie, and that is around courage and how we can be braver in our lives, in how we communicate, in how we connect, in how we live and lead. And so, yeah, that's what I have a deep passion around helping people to do, is to just sometimes do the very things that their fearful self would rather they didn't.
I feel like that's your shtick, is how to get me to jump off the cliff and not look back. And so, but I have to know what inspired all of your, because you said there is a weave or kind of a common theme. And I think so too, because when you were on a couple of years ago, I think courage is kind of the foundation of everything you do. And it's kind of that overcoming fear. It was interesting. This is a side note, but I was listening to Mel Robbins' book, and she was talking about how she feels like fear is founded a lot in us being worried about what other people think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people sometimes mistake and they think that courage is I'm without fear. But I don't think so. And I know you address that in your book. Courage doesn't mean you're without fear. How do you describe that? Because I don't think we have to be fear-free, do we?
No, it's not about fear extermination. It's about fear regulation, so that we're managing our fear. And I think this idea that we can be fear-free or fearless in the literal sense of that, it's misguided. And frankly, I think it can have people continually feeling like they're failing. The reality is, Angie, we humans are wired to feel afraid. I mean, we wouldn't be here as a species if we didn't have moments where we felt afraid and anxious, and we second guessed ourselves, and we have self-doubt, and we worry what people might think, as Mel Robbins has addressed in her book, Let Them Theory. But for me, I want to look at this through a lens of, okay, you might be feeling that way, but courage is actually a decision to take action despite how you're feeling. It's not about feeling filled with bravado or 100% confidence and zero doubt. It is about deciding, I'm going to do this thing because what I want to create or achieve is more important to me than what I'm afraid could happen. And so it's about making our commitment to a desired positive outcome bigger than our fear of a negative outcome.
Huh. Okay. So let's unpack that for a minute. We're going to have to walk through this. So you said fear extermination versus fear regulation. So you're like, hey, you don't have to exterminate fear. You're not going to be, the Orkin guy and come out and just get rid of all the fear. But you can regulate the fear. And what I hear you say is that your drive or your decision to take action is so much bigger than the fear. But what I find is what keeps people stuck, including me, is that I can make a decision to take action, or in my head, I can know what that looks like, but fear can still keep me glued to the ground,
Uh-huh.
right? And so take me through it a little bit,
Yeah, no,
right?
absolutely. Well, we all can. I'm sure that everybody listening or watching right now can think of a moment, and it may be earlier today, where you knew there was something you needed to do, but you hesitated to do it. Or maybe you've been procrastinating it a long time, a difficult conversation you needed to have, an ask you needed to make, a change you've been putting off and rationalizing, now's not the right time. I'm too busy. I'm not sure what I'm doing. It's winter. It's Tuesday. We can always find reasons to not do the very things that we know deep in ourselves we need to do. And, just backing back a little bit before we sort of dive into some of the key principles I've written about in my new book, I want to just point out that there's two core dimensions to courage. Yes, it is the decision to take action, even though we're feeling afraid, even though that there may be some, legitimate risks there. It's not that there's not always a risk that things mightn't go well. There can be. But it's also the second dimension. It's also the management of our fear. And Angie, the reason I've written this book, or one of the reasons, is one, my own experience over the last 5 years since I wrote my last book. I've moved continent, back living here in the United States, but I've worked with incredibly senior executives at a high level who are incredibly intelligent and well-educated. We've also weathered the pandemic, and these different factors all have intersected in a way that has made me recognize so often we are more afraid than we need to be. And it's not that all fear is invalid. It's just that so often we have these magnified perceptions of the danger, and we make ourselves more afraid. Oh, I just couldn't do that. It would kill me. Or I'm terrified of change. Or, this situation is just so stressful. And we talk up our fear and we make ourselves more anxious than we need to be. And so part of what it takes for us to take the brave actions we need to take that will serve us, that will help us to thrive and to enjoy more of the things we really want in our lives, is learning to just manage that fear response that sets itself up in our body and has people like you, wholly intelligent people like you and me, sometimes holding back when intellectually we know we need to step forward.
I think that was really well put, because what you said was the first step is, yes, we have to decide we're going to take action. And I do think that that's kind of where we get stuck. It's like, okay, I know I need change, but because I can't predict what change looks like, it's that old saying of the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, because I can't predict what that looks like. How do I know it's not going to be worse? And so then you said, so then we have to manage our fear. And I feel like for me, I always describe it as my anxious brain is always scanning. It's always scanning, and it's always trying to figure out what my next move is. And if that's my next move, then how will that play out? Almost like I'm
Yeah.
writing a book for I'm scanning, right? Well, if I do this, then this, and this, and this, and this person will be affected. If I do this, and then I go through the whole thing,
Yeah.
and I create all these scenarios that really, if I'm going to be frank, are BS, because I don't know facts about any of those things. That's
Yeah.
just my anxious
Yeah.
brain waking me up at 1 a.m, telling me stories. And
Yeah.
so in my stories, they're so real. I got to tell you. So you said that we have to kind of manage that, like, instead of magnifying the danger, we have to manage that.
Yeah, and that's our perception. And just recognizing, Angie, the fact that you do that is wholly normal. In fact, studies of the brain show, yes, our brains are exquisitely wired to be on alert for any potential threats to our sense of safety or comfort, our well-being, including our identity. Like, what might people say about me if I mess this up? It's why so many people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying because we are deeply social creatures and we want to be liked and we want to fit in. But our brains are twice as sensitive to what could go wrong than what it is we might want to make more right. And so when you're thinking about doing something, our potential losses, potential loss of face, loss of income, loss of reputation, loss of harmony in our social group can just dominate our minds, and we can be just so transfixed on that. And to your exact point a minute ago, we end up suffering way more in our own imagination than we do in reality, because so many of the things we're creating fear casts about are often really unlikely to happen. And so just recognizing we have these deeply entrenched cognitive biases, and I unpack 4 key fear traps. I call them fear traps in my book. But just recognizing that we have them, at least that shines a light on them. And so we have them and they don't have us. And knowing that, in those very moments that we're like, it feels really unsafe, actually, it's a lot less unsafe than you think. And to your point around, that what we're talking about today, the reason our dangers, our safety zone is really our danger zone. Often we sacrifice our talents, our passions, the biggest aspirations that inspire us on the altar of short-term safety, what gives us a short-term sense of safety and security. It's like, oh, well, I put nothing at risk if I don't put myself out there. But in the process of sacrificing what we most want, we end up betraying ourselves. Or in the process of trying to avoid someone not liking me or being criticized, we actually really do ourselves a profound disservice. And so we have to be willing to just take that action, even though there's this something inside of us screaming, don't do it, which is essentially what it is to step into our courage gap.
Yeah, I like that idea about taking off the handcuffs. And also just the fact that you explained that our scanning anxious brain is wired to look for what we could lose versus what we could gain. Not because I think that we are necessarily negative, but because we go into self-protection, right? And while it could end up being self-betrayal, which I love that, it's actually self-protection in the moment. We see it as that because we are staying with what we know, and what we know may be not the best thing for us, but by gosh, we know it. And so, yeah, we're thinking about, well, I would lose this, 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 this. And you're saying, well, I have to get over here and think about what I would gain and how I would grow. And instead of betraying myself and keeping myself boxed up. So how do you help these high-powered CEOs and these people in everyday life walk this courage walk and say, let's put that aside for a minute, and what if this could be possible?
Well, I think that's where being really anchored to what it is you most want. I mean, the first chapter in the book is focus on what you want, not on what you fear. And I unpack that in terms of what's your North Star, and what are the values that really define how you want to live your life. And those things help provide this compass that sometimes compels us to do the very things that we don't want to do. I mean, I'm not saying we always want to take the braver path, or we want to put ourselves out there, or we want to have a difficult conversation or risk rejection or change something up in our lives, because that's not easy. It's not comfortable. It's often not convenient. But having that clarity of what we want and what we value most, including, I talk about putting be before do, like deciding who is it you want to be as a human. I mean, we've all got so many years here, right? If we make 100, we're doing pretty well. Most of us, don't live that long. And often we don't get clear and go, who is it I want to be in my life? Who is it I want to be for the people I care about? But who do I want to be for myself? And so whether I'm working with a CEO, or I'm working with an entrepreneur, or I'm working with someone who just wants to just level up their life, just getting that clarity about what is it that matters a lot to you? What is it that matters more to you than what you're afraid of? And until we're clear about what it is that matters more to us than avoiding discomfort, then our decisions are going to be guided by avoiding discomfort and avoiding uncertainty and avoiding change and all those things that aren't wholly comfortable. And as you know, Angie, from your work, the work you do helping people to just bring their best selves physically to what they're doing too, we don't grow when we're comfortable. And we don't grow when we're sticking with what we've done 1,000 times before, but when we're stretching ourselves. And so just getting that clarity about our vision and values makes such a huge impact.
It does. And I like that. What do you want to be before what do you want to do? Because it's so many times we're driven by identity, if you will, but it's more about who are you at your core? What are your values? What matters to you? What do you want to be to you? Like, how do you want to answer to you at the end of the day? And, I also work as a therapist, so I'm really great at helping other people. And then, of course, we all have to look in the mirror and help our own selves. But it kind of goes back to that exercise that I've talked about in previous podcasts where you write your funeral and you decide at what age am I going to live to? And then you do the timeline, and wherever you are on the timeline, it's like, well, this is all the time that you have left. What are you going to do with it? And how are you going to make the most of it? And that was a really disturbing exercise for me. I was like, hold on, this is getting a little too real. I'm over on this side.
Yeah.
But it was really, really good and really
Yeah.
powerful. And again, it's how do I answer to me at the end of my days? So, Margie, I think that this is super cool. And I think that that's a great idea. And I think that a lot of times, really, it's people like you who can get people into a different space, hopefully people like me in the work that I do, and walk them through that process of determining what do you want to be and what does matter to you, because ultimately then we can walk it back and say, well, that's got to be bigger than your fear then. And so where do they go from there? You start with that. What do you
Yeah,
want?
I start with getting that focus and, really setting that intention. And then I get people to re-script some of the narratives that aren't serving them. It could be that they're keeping them stuck in place. It could be that they're making them more anxious and stressed than they need to be. It could be that they're just really sophisticated, intellectualized excuses for staying comfortable. And we actually, living here in the United States, we have the benefit of having access to many things that allow us to live really comfortable lives. But what we don't recognize often is how comfort doesn't stay comfortable forever. And that when we are avoiding signing up for that thing or putting ourselves out there or making a change or something, that actually over time, our confidence starts to wane. It's like a muscle. So getting people to re-script the stories they're telling themselves, because our beliefs are the operating system of behavior. I mean, all behaviors are belief driven. And sometimes we don't recognize, even when we're telling ourselves little lies, our brains are really good at coming up and finding evidence to support what we want to tell ourselves is true. So just challenging your best thinking, which takes courage, and being willing to own, you know what? The story I've been telling myself about the way things are isn't wholly true. And looking for evidence of why we can make a change, why we can do things. Last year, and I think you and I connected on Instagram, so you may know how I grew up with my dad used to call me Bumblefoot as a kid. And I internalized this label that I was uncoordinated, I was unathletic, I can't run. And a year ago, as I was starting 2024, I created this. I just got really clear. In my life, I want to look back one day and go, I ran a marathon, which isn't something I would have ever done. Like I just run marathons for breakfast. That's not how I am. And it just having that clarity of vision allowed me last year to go, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to sign up. I'm going to find a way to get into the New York Marathon. I signed up for a charity. I created a plan. I put in a lot of very uncomfortable miles, and I did it. And I ran a marathon. And I shared that not as a way to gloat, because if I can run a marathon, anyone who can walk can run a marathon. There were people doing it with calipers and all sorts of stuff. So all I'm saying is that it is so much about that mindset, but what are the beliefs that you're telling yourself, and where is not everything you tell yourself is true. So that second step is really re-scripting. And I'm happy to kind of unpack the others and the principles if we have time, but I'll hand that over to you, Angie.
I like the re-scripting part because it's, in my line of work, a lot of times I call it reframing, but it's kind of looking at what you're constantly saying to yourself, that
Mhm.
internalized self-talk, and then re-scripting the narrative. Is this really true? And also just let's say that it is, but how would you overcome the obstacles? Because the truth is, a lot of times, most of us who've done big things and called on our courage, the irony is that I find is that all the things I feared didn't happen, but stuff I never expected did. And so it's like, oh, that was a lot of spinning. And turns out everything I was scared of didn't even happen, but the things that I didn't see coming did, and guess what? I'm still standing,
Yeah.
right? And so it's so ironic how our brains, I always say that I have a very creative, anxious brain, which is why I help other people with their anxious brains, because doggone it, I'm gonna pass the torch. But I love that. And you mentioned a key piece that I really wanted to go after, and that's the confidence piece. Because the thing is, it's like, to me, it's like having a wound. And it starts to bleed because you're super uncomfortable and you know that you need to make change. God, you got to close this wound because it hurts and it won't stop bleeding. And you know things are wrong and it's like almost toxic. And then you make an excuse. You put a band-aid on it. You stop the bleeding for a minute. And you're like, nope, it's going to be fine. And then it bleeds again because something comes up that reminds you that you're super
Mhm.
uncomfortable. You put that band-aid on it again.
Yeah.
And it's just, after a while, you start to become a shell of yourself because you're like, who am I? I thought I was bigger than this, stronger than this. And confidence is key because when you start to lose your confidence, your courage diminishes, right?
Yes, though I would actually look at it through a slightly different lens than that, Angie. If we define confidence as our belief in our ability to succeed at something, which is how it's often defined. So, can I be successful at giving a talk on stage? Can I be successful at running a marathon, shedding weight, starting a business, changing jobs, raising kids, whatever it is? If we wait for confidence, that is our full belief that I cannot fail at that, we may be waiting our entire lives. And so I actually believe that courage precedes confidence. And we know from self-efficacy theory, Albert Bandura's work, that we build our confidence, our self-efficacy that, I know I can do this through experience. And you don't get that experience if you're waiting to feel confident to try something. And so there is so much value in trying things before we're confident, in doing the very thing we're afraid we won't be able to succeed at. Because even though we mightn't completely nail it and get a 10 out of 10, we still realize, well, the ground didn't open up beneath me and I didn't die. I learned something. I met some people. Hey, I made some connections. I grew, and it actually then becomes self-reinforcing. And we build our confidence that way. If I'd waited until I was confident I could write a great book or give a great speech, I'd have never started out doing either. And so for anyone listening, I would say give yourself permission to do something even though you're not 100% confident you can do it, but do it anyway. I mean, courage is fear walking. And when we give ourselves permission to try things, not to be reckless or foolhardy or not considering and managing the potential downsides, but just to try things, even though we may be imperfect in our efforts, that actually liberates us to try a lot more, to learn a lot faster, and ultimately we build the very confidence that we may have otherwise spent years waiting to feel.
Yeah, I like that definition of confidence because if you really think about it, even if you quote unquote muck it up and your worst fears came true or other fears came true, getting through that does build your confidence. So either way, your confidence is going to soar because getting through obstacles builds confidence and succeeding builds confidence. I mean, to me, it's kind of a win-win. It's I like that you have to courage is fear walking. So you kind of have to just give yourself permission to take the leap of faith. And from there, the confidence will start to build step by step as you work your way through the situation. So that's a good, I like that one. That's a better way of looking at confidence. I love that you said that. If you're waiting to feel confident, you're going to wait a long time. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
kind of like I recently went skydiving, and right when they opened the door, it was like,
You did
"Girl,
not
you're
feel
out of here."
confident.
I could feel a little push behind me, and it's like, there ain't no turning back
Yeah.
from here.
Yeah, it's great.
So it wasn't that I was confident. It's that I had decided I was going to call on my courage. And then I became confident. When I landed on the ground and I knew I was still alive, I was like, oh, yeah, I wasn't scared at all.
Hallelujah. Yeah. I've done that too. I know it.
Yeah, exactly. So is there anything else, Margie? What's a key thing you would say as a takeaway about courage for everybody still kind of on the fence, like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. I know. And then they could give you a million reasons why they still aren't sure.
Yes. Yes. You'll always, I would say one, you will always have some little reason that will be tapping on your shoulder going, who do you think you are? What if you fail, etc. I would say at the core of it, if you embrace discomfort as a cue and a signal that you are moving onto center court in your own life, and embrace the growing pains, as kids talk about growing pains, like embrace that discomfort as your growth. Instead of like, oh, I don't want to feel nervous. I don't want to feel, that rumbling in my stomach, etc. But you said, you know what? This is a sign I'm growing into who I can be. And you pursue that. If every day you said, I'm going to lean in and do something that's actually a little uncomfortable for me, it would actually expand exponentially your future. And it would expand your confidence over time, your courage over time, your resilience over time. It would deepen your connections with other humans, because you'd have to have sometimes, you would lean into the conversations that you often avoid. And so I think for all of us to really embrace the growing pains that come with us living the fullest life that we each have it within us to live, because that's the gap between who we are now and who we can be, the actions we're taking, the actions we can take, the life we have and the life we want. And it takes courage to close that gap. So don't feel like you're not doing a good job when you're like, actually, that's a sign that you're right there on center stage.
I'm really glad that you said that, because I think I'm so glad that we kind of ended on that, because I think that's key. I think just being willing to face that you might not be where you want to be is a first step. Just being willing to have that clarity and look in the mirror and just meet yourself with honesty and clarity and transparency and say, you know what? This is who I am now, but this is ultimately who I want to be. And there's a gap here and I need to tackle it. I think that in and of itself is super, super empowering. So I'm glad you said that. I think that alone is like, hey, if somebody's coming to you and saying, I'm uncomfortable, you're like, cool. That's a great starting place, right?
Oh, yes. I say hallelujah for being uncomfortable, because you know who I feel the most sorry for? Are people who live their lives in the middle octave of life. And it's between, to quote Adam Grant, between a place of being like depressed and thriving is the land of languishing, is this middle child of, well, it's not so bad. It's fine. I'm not really miserable. I'm like, be a little uncomfortable. That's a sign of you needing and stepping into where you need to be in your life, and move toward that. I mean, move toward the state that you don't want, away from that, and toward the state you do want. And that's going to be uncomfortable work. But just recognizing the courage you have ever admired in another human being, it exists in you too. If you spot it, you got it.
I wish I could go back through all your one-liners that I wrote down. I wrote down like I'm taking notes in a college history class. So Margie, before we go, could you tell people how to reach you and how to get a hold of your new book, The Courage Gap?
Thanks, Angie. Well, you can grab the book anywhere books are sold. Obviously, it's on Amazon. I just did a book signing at Barnes and Noble. But anywhere where you get books, your local bookstore, I'm sure you could order it if it's not on the shelf. And I also invite people to connect with me on or through my website, margiewarrell.com, and also on social media, wherever you hang out online too.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Margie. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to Strong Mind, Strong Body. We'll see you next week.